two. Then there's a pair of us.
Hello, creative people. Thanks for tuning into Melody or Witchcraft. I'm your host, Catherine Petricelli. On the podcast, we hear a poet read a work of their own and an Emily Dickinson poem of their choosing that contributed to their work. We discuss poetry, Dickinson, the fluidity of time, and the scope and sources of creative inspiration. The past is such a curious creature, Dickinson wrote. Join us to find out how it can teach us about our now.
How dreary to be somebody.
I'm going to read a couple poems by Dickinson that end up being combined. Like trains of cars on tracks of plush, I hear the level B. Ajar across the flowers goes their velvet masonry, withstands until the sweet assault their chivalry consumes, while he, victorious, tilts away to vanquish other blooms. His feet are shod with gauze, his helmet is of gold, his breast a single onyx, with Chrysophrase inlaid. His labor is a chant, his idleness a tune. Oh, for a bee's experience of clovers and of noon.
That was Gabrielle Calvocoressi reading Emily Dickinson. Gabrielle Calvocoressi's new collection of poetry, The New Economy, was a finalist for the 2025 National Book Award in Poetry. Other collections include The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, Apocalyptic Swing, and Rocket Fantastic, which is the winner of the Audre Lorde Award for Lesbian Poetry. They serve on the board of chancellors of the Academy of American Poets and live in Old East Durham, North Carolina, where joy, compassion, and social justice are at the center of their personal and poetic practice. Hi, Gabby. Thanks for being here. I'm really glad we could make it happen.
I'm so glad that we could make it happen. Hi, I'm here in my backyard in Old East Durham, North Carolina. It is near the end of March. We're just past the vernal equinox. And one thing I was saying to you is we are in a time of year in the South that we call the pollening. And so if you were on my porch, you would see, there's just pollen everywhere. There's just clouds of it blowing past, and we have a beehive, but it collapsed this year because of somebody's using pesticides.
Oh no.
And so normally I would look across and I would see this pollen and I would think, oh my gosh, the bees, it's like bee heaven. But we don't have our bees right now, but on Friday, Justin the beekeeper, who's in the poem I'm going to read, is going to show up with another hive. So hopefully by the time you all listen to this, we'll be awash in honey and our bee neighbors will be back.
Oh my gosh. So many reasons to be envious of everyone's miraculous lives. Thank you for bringing these poems. As we were talking about, these two poems, each of them a pair of quatrains, were combined in the early editions that were put out by Mabel Loomis Todd, who was the primary and first editor for Dickinson's posthumous work.
Yeah. And in fact, I was realizing what I could do is, so they put it together and they title it The Bee, which actually really, right? It's sort of fascinating as much as anything. It's interesting to watch the pollen blowing all around and how wild. And this is a really wild time of year here. And bees are like that. Bees are our neighbors. But one thing I've learned with a hive is you do not own a bee. It is impossible. Why would one want to? And so it's interesting watching them corral these bee poems and making them less bee-like. Maybe I'll just read the combined one. Here it is as edited. Like trains of cars on tracks of plush, I hear the level B. Ajar across the flower goes their velvet masonry, withstands until the sweet assault their chivalry consumes, while he, victorious, tilts away to vanquish other blooms. It's almost unbearable to read it. His feet are shod with gauze, his helmet is of gold, his breast a single onyx, with Chrysophrase, I don't know how to say that, inlaid. His labor is a chant, his idleness a tune. Oh, for a bee's experience of clovers and of noon. They're completely, it's so unbee-like. It's so unhive-like. It's really interesting to think about. She's obsessed with trains, and she's got these trains and the bee, and we're in the middle of this like moment of real mechanization and industrialization. We're
Sure.
also thinking about the Civil War and thinking about the number of people that in this country who are enslaved at that time, and the mechanization of the human body. And bees as also put into a kind of domestic service to make honey. Anyway, it's just she is working with so many things, and the bees are so wild, and they're caught between industrialization and all this other, and their wildness. And then it's wild to watch someone try and contain those two poems. It's really,
Yeah. Well, even the titling and the
yeah,
sectioning that happened of her work certainly does that. And when the poems are in the nature category, it is a bit distressing. We can only speculate about motives, about
yeah,
what Mabel Loomis Todd would have seen here, or why she felt the need to combine them besides the subject matter. I mean, we have this kind of sensory overload, and I'm so interested in this, the one that begins, his feet are shod with
yeah,
gauze. You can almost see her bent down to the grass,
yeah.
looking an inch from what's happening there. And it's so textural and it's so colorful.
It's also like totally hallucinogenic. It's totally,
Ecstatic, I think was
yeah,
the word
it's
that came to my
ecstatic.
mind when I read it.
It's frightening. It's awe in the oldest sense of the word, like awful. She's also really different from the bee there, right? Like she is looking at this thing not so differently from how we would look at a god, for how we would look at, any kind of being that is really, that we are meditating upon and is also like deeply different from us. And that's one of the things she does so well. The bee is really, really other in this poem, but in a really powerful way.
Well, it's
Yeah.
kind of that reaching. It's almost like what I said, imagining your pollinating time and how envious I am of that in a certain way, but kind of, is that a train?
Yeah.
Train.
I wish
Stop
you all were
it.
here. The train is right here. It's going through. The pollen is everywhere. I took the most beautiful walk through. Everybody should come to Durham.
Like trains of cars on tracks of plush, might it be?
Might it be? Yes. But also, she would have heard the train.
Oh, of course. Well, yeah. So her father, Edward Dickinson, just to let folks know who may not be familiar, brought the trains to Amherst. And
Yeah.
I want to say 1853. Don't quote me on that. And then, of course, Edward being Edward complained about all the people that were then
Right.
coming to town after, he created. But yeah, so you're talking about the bee as other, and I was thinking of this kind of wishing into another body
Oh, yeah.
that happens there.
The wishing into another body, this idea also, like, I mean, it's interesting to think about someone like, in what, 1877, Gerard Manley Hopkins is writing about the feet being shod. So it's interesting thinking about this idea of mechanization, the word shod, but then here's shod and gold rhyming, and then she gets onyx going, and then chrysophrase. It's extraordinary how, as we're meditating on this thing that is so other from us, the rhymes are bringing us through and bringing it closer and closer to us. So I think about this a lot when I think about gender in my own poems. I'm not saying she's talking about gender here, but there is like this idea of embodiment and the vessel. Yeah, just like the kind of meditation on the vessel, and how in meditating on it through the rhyme, you get closer and closer to it. I mean, you are both different from it and also morphing into it.
The rhyme and the other kinds of sonics here, right? Because there's so much syllabants happening in both the poems.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Shod and gauze and breast and onyx and chrysophrase phrase. I can't even say that word either. Idleness, experience. And then in the other poem, we have trains, cars, tracks. We have flowers, goes, masonry, sweet assault, victorious, vanquish. It's
Yeah.
just super yummy. That poem could be talking about a bee, but it could also be talking about other things, right?
Oh, Yeah, it could be talking about a lot of other things. I mean, highly adult.
Well, and this is what's interesting to me, too, because Mabel Loomis Todd would not have been your prudish New Englander, right? This is a woman who had journals she most definitely wanted seen, where she spoke in detail about her relations with Austin, who would have been Emily's brother, all kinds of symbols for when they had sex, when she had orgasms. I mean, so this is the person that's going, oh, okay, we'll just tidy this up. It's an odd choice, right?
It's very strange. I keep thinking, like, oh gosh, I wish my dear pal, the great Dickinson scholar Eliza Richards, were here to tell me how wrong I am. When the poems are allowed to be in their original vessel, the sound is so erotic. The drone of it, the chant of it. There are all kinds of spaces that we're blowing over. There's all kinds of different utterances that are being made. We are really looking at bodies. There's a lot of plushness. One thing I'm really struck about when I look at the combined one is it really becomes like about a bee. Like it really gets locked down into the bee. But also, in some ways, the bee becomes more our like literary idea of a bee. It becomes less magical in some way. Whereas one of the things I always think about with the bees is you're supposed to talk to them all the time. You're supposed to go out and talk to them because they are considered to be a portal between the living and the dead. And in fact, probably a lot of people know this, but when a queen or king dies in England, one of the first things they do is they go tell the royal beekeeper because he has to go tell the bees. And so you're always supposed to tell the bees about when someone has died. That energy seems to be in the two fragments, whereas I always say, like, you can always tell a poet who's writing about bees who doesn't have bees or know much about bees. It becomes much more like the combined bee poem, where it's just like the bee is, in some ways, has less agency. It just becomes the bee we all think we know.
Mm-hmm. The taming of the poems. Of course, no matter what, if someone's making a choice, and here again, I'm going back to Mabel as the editor, there's going to be a degree of arbitrariness, there's going to be a degree of selfishness, there's going to be a degree of personal agendas, etc. Would we rather not have the poems at all? No, of course, we're happy to have the poems. Yeah. But then we can't ignore the violence done and the decades of misdirection in terms of her role in characterizing Dickinson as she did because it sold books.
Yeah.
How do we feel about the poem that doesn't get to be what it was meant to be? And you can extrapolate and metaphor into whatever you want to, the poem, the fill in the blank, when we also can't know exactly what it was meant to be. So there's that piece of it. And what to do with all of that very messy jigsaw.
One of the things I always feel like is I just thank God for the archivists. Thank God for the people who have spent years and years in the archive of Dickinson looking at those poems, people like the remarkable Jen Bervin, people like Eliza Richards, I mean, just Susan Howe. And I suppose we have Mabel Todd to thank, right, for putting those poems in the world. And then there are people who look at those poems and have learned about Dickinson and start to say, wait a minute, like, what else is here? Where else can I find it? You know, so maybe one way to think about it is, feel free in the comments to tell me I'm the worst. But maybe there are some poets who write a kind of poem that is a great gateway to poetry for a lot of people. And then as time goes on, they begin to have a more complicated relationship to poetry, maybe even to the poems of that poet. You know what I mean? But the first poems just like sound really good. They feel nice. They are compelling. There's no way to make Dickinson suck. Like, there just isn't, which is one of the great things about Dickinson, right? Like, that poem doesn't suck. Like, I find it painful to read, but, like, you know, come on, the language is phenomenal, and that is always going to come through. So those poems become a kind of gateway. It's pretty remarkable to see the fragments, to see the originals after seeing the Mabel Loomis Todd. To me, the most egregious thing that she does is not even like putting them together, but it's, for instance, taking away the M dash after B in the first one and making it a colon. Who does that? It makes it a completely different poem.
And if she had left it, And the editors in 1890 said, no, we can't have this nonsense.
Right.
So it was also adhering to the times. It's so easy to demonize. It's so easy to want to.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Right.
it's
She does it because she needs to do it. That, if we're talking about violence to the poem, that makes that moment completely different. If I think about so many of those moments in a Dickinson poem as separate events, you know what I mean? Like that M dash is an event in the poem. The colon is not so much an event. Like trains of cars on tracks of plush, I hear the level B. I'm starting to hear it. That M dash lets me hear it. A jar across the flower goes. I'm thinking lots of different things then. I'm hearing about how sound moves across a jar and sort of the resonance of that. I'm thinking of how a bee's body could actually end up sounding like when I blow across a jar. That could be what buzzing sounds. It's also this like wild thing about the flowers there and the velvet masonry. I mean, the M dash makes me understand that I really don't understand it.
it's almost like an equal sign, maybe the colon. It's
Yeah,
like,
and it makes one feel, or it makes me feel, maybe that I understand it when I don't. And maybe the most beautiful thing is like how confused I can get in that moment. And still, because her syntax is so clear, I do understand it on some deeper level without even necessarily my brain getting it yet. And the M dash makes me have to do all kinds of work.
I would love it if you would read the poem that you brought for us.
These are part of these poems called the Lentan Cisterns. And it's Lent. It's time of year that is Lent and Ramadan and Passover comes and all these times. Lent Cistern number 43, every day but Sunday. Formless as a cloud building or dispersed, as on April's pollen, eyes blooming open, open, shaking side to side, as is their wont. My head lolls back and forth on the stem from my shoulders. Justin comes through the side gate, fields of him. If I take my glasses off, he's everywhere. Look, we're trumpet and corona, one body and box full of bees. Where he's headed, the smoke from the smoker that covers us both wax, some pine needles. Whatever he has around it makes us smell like church, I say, lulled. Leave my glasses off. I'm all petals and nectar. We're one hum, one gold breeze into the colony that eases, heals, kills, reforms itself around us. I inhale, lean into golden musk of us assembled. What if this was all my body, my stem, my bulb, my roots, my endlessness? We host a hive and then beekeepers come and we get to go to bee school and learn about the bees. And this year they came, we thought something was wrong. It's so hard for the bees to make it through the winter. It's so hard, especially with climate change and the fluctuations of temperature. We've only had 2 collapses, but last year we had a collapse because of the temperature fluctuations. And this year Justin came and he opened the hive.
So just to explain to folks, Justin is your beekeeper. I'm not sure if we said
Yeah,
that
Justin's beekeeper.
while we were recording, because I know we were talking about it before we were recording, but
Oh yeah,
just to make it clear.
Justin is one of the beekeepers and figures in a lot of the poems because Justin is also someone who I think that many of us who live in bodies that are maybe not the body we dream of, Justin is kind of an approximation of the body I think my body wishes it lived in.
How does he feel about being in the poems?
I think he likes it. I'm sending him the book, but I've told him over and again. He's a big figure. He brings us tremendous joy, and the bees bring us unbelievable joy. But normally this time of year, like in the Dickinson poem, and I think like in that poem I was trying to build, it's a really hallucinogenic time of year. And so when he came through at that time of year, it's true, there's just like pollen all around him. Who are we? Who are the bees?
I love this. Fields of him. If I take my glasses off, he's everywhere. And then
Yeah.
the poem moves to the we. Look, we're trumpet and corona. Now we're first person plural. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
turn.
Thank you. And I think about like, I really, Dickinson is someone who is just really important to me. At first I was going to do My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun, and I think Brenda Hillman's doing that. But I love doing the bee poems because living where we live and living with the bees and having the train, I think about Dickinson a lot, and I do feel the things that are actually most important to me about her work, which is it's brilliance, but it's strangeness and it's deep eroticism. Like it's pragmatic otherworldliness.
Pragmatic otherworldliness. I like that. I want that stitched. I
Yeah.
want that stitched
And
and
I'm
framed.
right. Yeah, and like I love the woo woo. I love it. But like she is not that to me. She is exactly of her era. If we think about what's happening in that moment, imagine like you are living in a time where you have never heard a train. You've never seen a train, and then there's a train in your town, and it's that sound woo woo, and then the bees are buzzing. It's not that different, you know? Imagine what it is to have been looking at bees longer than you've looked at trains, or listening to bees longer than you've known what a train sounds like. And then they're meeting each other. I think Dickinson is that. Dickinson is that moment, if that makes sense.
That's really beautiful. I love that.
And the bee poems are that.
Yeah, and the bee poems are that. And you have a bit of this, sibilance as well in yours. We are assembled, we are stem and roots and endlessness. So yeah, we're buzzing. In other words,
Yeah.
it's great. It's like a beautiful orchestra, both your poem and the Dickinson's poems, where is it sound, is it color, is it texture, is it, what's coming forward and what's stepping back, which voices are harmonizing. Your choice for no punctuation. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I wrote the Lentan Cisterns. I was at Radcliffe for a year at the Radcliffe Institute.
So that's Harvard University for folks that don't know.
And I had this wonderful fellowship, this year-long fellowship. But I got there and I hadn't written poems in a long time. And I go through these periods of not writing. And it was Lent, Ash Wednesday, and I thought to myself, I'm going to give up chocolate. And then I thought, what would be harder than giving up chocolate? And I thought, well, giving up self-loathing would be harder than giving up chocolate. Which, of course, in Lent, like giving things up means coming face to face with them. The great theologian Kate Bowler, a number of people would say, like, Lent is not about just like giving the thing up and patting yourself on the back. Like it's winnowing and regeneration. And so I thought, okay, well, what would it mean to give up self-loathing? I love the train. And I thought, well, it would mean writing a poem a day for all of Lent. And I include the Sundays in that. Just making something. And every day, whatever I made would be the poem. It could be a line. It could be 2 lines. And the other rule was that after I did it, I would not look at them until the following Lent. I wouldn't look at any of them. And I printed them out, but I did not look at them. I did not.
That's discipline right there.
Worth doing, I would say to people, to like write, even if it's just 10 poems, and don't look at them for a year. It's amazing, like, what happens. I ended up, after when I finally looked at them, having a lot more material than I thought I would. I also just tried to play with different forms and different ways of doing things. And I have a visual disability, nystagmus, that can make me very tired. When my eyes get tired, it makes it hard for me to write poems and read and do any of those things. And so when I was working on that poem, that was just probably a day where my eyes were really not working very well. I decided to forego punctuation. I decided to just get the words on the page. I also did think about someone like Dickinson. Like, I wanted to see, like, could I make certain kinds of sounds that could teach the reader the grammar of the poem without me even having to guide them through, like, a kind of scoring or punctuation that they, quote unquote, understood.
Sure.
And so that is what ended up happening. I can be someone who can be a little resistant to poems without punctuation. So part of the rule was sometimes for these to just write a poem with no punctuation. Fine. Like, you think it's so easy? Go ahead and try it, Gabby. These kinds of things. I mean, that's something we have with Dickinson. We also have it with the great poet Mary Oliver, is people thinking, oh, I can write a Dickinson poem. Like, I can do that with the M dashes. Oh, I could write Wild Geese, Mary Oliver. Go ahead and try it. It's really hard.
Since you brought up Radcliffe, I was watching a bit of a presentation that you did there. It was really this fully contextualized presentation in the sense that you were reading your poems, but it was within your story and who you are. And, at one point you have on the big screen behind you a picture of yourself as a young child, and you're talking to that child. I've had several guests tell me they have come to Dickinson more easily with the context of who she was, with her letters, with a sense of her personality. Biography can be also something that trips us up around people we love. It's dangerous times for this stuff. Sometimes, we learn things we don't want to know about heroes. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the creative life and the personal biography, whether it's your own or people you admire, people you've been influenced by.
I'm not someone who's allergic to knowing the bio of a poet, especially if you've got a situation where you have poems and then you have, for instance, journals and you have letters. To be able to build a life of an artist is really important. Because for people who are interested in making a life as an artist, that's really important to see how people have done it. It gives one a window into the poems that's really interesting, not just in terms of, oh, this is what was going on in their life, and so now I know what the poem is about, but just like, this is how they made a life alongside these other things, challenges, blessings, difficulties. This is how they made a life that allowed for these poems to be made. That's very powerful to watch. People talk about someone like Sexton or Plath. Sure, you can absolutely read those poems without knowing anything about the biography. To me, it only makes the poems more extraordinary. If you understand that when Anne Sexton was trying to publish poems in the New Yorker, she had to get her husband to write a letter to say that she had not plagiarized those poems. That's a really powerful thing to think about when you're also listening to the rage in those poems, the relationship to feminine life, the relationship to motherhood, being in relation with others, right? That only helps our experience of the poem. For someone like Dickinson, particularly because of all the things that have been done to her poems, I just think the benefit of having as much information as you can, looking at these fragments and also understanding the world she lived, to me at least, it only makes her more radical. But it also disabuses us of this notion, this idea of her as this hermit who, was completely antisocial and locked away in her room is just to completely misread her. And one of the things that it does is it diminishes her just ravenous curiosity. The absolute curiosity of this person and the deep, deep commitment to being neighbors. That she is neighbors with that bee. She is neighbors with her sister-in-law. She is neighbors with people that maybe she doesn't always talk to, but come into the house, who she's listening to. And I think one of the things that you can hear in her poems is her relentless curiosity, her deep desire to be, yes, perhaps on her own in some ways, but to be in deep community and collaboration with the world as it is changing and the world as it is manifesting, all of these things. There are other poets that I don't need it as much with, not because the poems aren't incredibly interesting, but because often it's 20th century poets and beyond who have made a real point of saying biography is not important in the work, and so, okay, fine, I don't really need to know. But I would say, for instance, if you're going to read someone like Lynn Haginian, you need to read my life, and you need to think about what it is for us to think about biography in every kind of poetics. For myself, I write a lot about my personal life, and I talk a lot about my personal life when I'm in the world. Openness is part of my poetics, vulnerability, and what it is to say things that maybe people don't want you to say or that you haven't been allowed to say is just a big part of my poetics. I also think as someone who had a parent who, and there's lots of different ways to talk about this. Some people say died by suicide, some people say committed suicide, some people say took her life. On different days, I say all of those things, so I'm going to say all those phrases. That is a subject that even in this day and age, people don't want to talk about. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, and yet so many people have had this event in their lives. And also many, many people from day to day have difficulty staying alive. That is something It is part of my biography. It's part of my poetics. And it's also just like, to me, the more I can talk about it, the more I open a kind of closet that many of us have been in. I often say, sure, I was in the closet of my sexuality, but no closet was bigger and harder to get out of than the closet of talking about my mother's mental illness, like, and my relationship to that when I was a child. And I think that's true for a lot of us. So I walked into our wonderful Regulator bookstore here in Durham, and I ordered the Garden Journals of Derek Jarman, where he's talking about, is it Dungeness is the name of the house in England? But, he has these journals that are being written also as he's coming to terms with his HIV diagnosis. I mean, these are important. These are also, I guess the truth is, like, there's also just, particularly right now, but it's always been true, there are so many people who want us dead, and everything we can do to prove that we were here and to show that we were here and to show other people what it's like to be here and try and stay alive and come to terms with the fact that maybe we won't, I think is very important.
Thank you for that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your touring with the new book, with the new economy, and sort of the very unique tactics you have taken.
I'm having the time of my life. I'm not making a bit of money, which, sort of, but that's
what?
I mean,
wait a minute. I thought you were a poet.
There's lots of different ways to decide what's fulfilling. And I realized that one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to go to bookstores. I wanted to go to the places that can't pay, don't pay. But I also wanted to think about, what does it mean to go into spaces where I may or may not sell books? What could I do to show up to those places? And no matter how many people we are, we feel fed, we feel in community, we feel nourished, and that everyone sees how grateful I am that they're there. And that we're all part of the story. I didn't know that anybody would say yes, but we said, you want to have a potluck? Potlucks to me are church suppers. I may be reading some poems, but then someone's going to tell me about, like, their mom's spanakopita that they brought. Nobody is that far away from hunger. Maybe these billionaires, who are making us all closer to hunger. So it's also a space where people can get fed. It's also a space where we're raising funds at almost every single one for some kind of organization that fights food insecurity in that town.
Well, this is amazing because, you're talking about neighbors and how connected in reality Dickinson was. And you are right in that image.
Hey, if anyone in Ireland, there's now all of a sudden a straight shot flight from here at RDU to Dublin. So if anyone wants to have a potluck in Ireland, I'm not kidding. I would love it. I mean, look, I love it when I'm asked to go read somewhere and I'm on a stage. But, like, more and more in my life right now, I just feel like the less we have people above talking to people below, the better off we are. It is better right now, I believe, to get rid of the stages, get rid of the podiums, and just talk together.
Well, because it's particularly a U.S. society, I feel like, we are a culture of experts, right? We make that pyramid, and there's one person that's allowed to be on the top. The star culture, whatever you want, celebrity culture. Yeah. It's not by mistake that I introduced the podcast, Hello Creative People, and that should be anyone who's listening, because that should be everyone who's listening.
Yeah, I have a poem in this book where there's a line that says, "One day I walked away from the empire of the expertise of others." It's that I spent so much of my time being told I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, by these people.
Give me a couldn't that people told you about poetry.
I couldn't write a poem. I remember being told by a classmate of mine when I was a poetry student, pulled me aside and said, we, the class, we still think of you as the weakest poet in the group, but you're getting better. These kinds of poetry workshops can be incredibly generative, but also incredibly damaging spaces exactly for that. And I think in a way that is different than fiction or nonfiction, we can also in poetry get really obsessed about, like, what a poem is and a poem isn't. Who can actually say what a poem is or isn't? It's one of the reasons this podcast is so cool. I just spent so much of my life as a non-binary person, a non-binary kid, having people look at me and tell me, what are you? Saying, what are you? Certainly here with this administration, this barbarous regime that we're in the middle of, people telling us that we don't care about each other, we don't care about our neighbors, that we are all a threat to each other, and that kind of indoctrination that's going on here now, where people are trying to keep us from just being on the same level, helping each other, looking at each other, talking to each other, feeding each other. They really want us to believe that there are people who are above and people who are below. The more we can break that down, the better off and safer we're going to be.
Yeah. Maybe just to wrap up, if you could offer up another poet of the past who you feel like is a great voice for looking at the times we are in currently.
There are so many poets. I would say a couple people. First of all, just like everyone should be reading Lucille Clifton.
Oh gosh, but that's one of those things where it's like that she can't be passed. How can that be passed? She's still with us.
She's still with us, but I do think it's important to keep her with us. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the remarkable things that I got to do in the last few weeks was go to the Clifton House in Baltimore, and I would like to give a plug to the Clifton House. Perhaps Lucille Clifton isn't in the past in the way that Dickinson is in the past, but there are certainly, many forces in this world that would like someone like Lucille Clifton to be in the past.
I hear you.
I would also say, I think looking at someone like Elizabeth Bishop with a queer lens is really worth doing that. I think that, she's complicated in a lot of ways. Her relationship to things like Brazil are really worth looking into and thinking about. They're deeply problematic. But she's also, to me, a remarkable poet and really interesting to look at in terms of what it is to, again, like look and look and look at things. Any poet we can have, Dickinson, Bishop, Lucille Clifton, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Sappho,
nice.
Yanis Ritsos, like anybody that we can be looking at who is helping us understand what it is to look at things and not look away. That is essential work to be doing right now. I also would say, it's a remarkable time. It always is, but it's a remarkable time to read the Iliad. Who did it? Is it Alice Oswald or Emily Wilson? I'm looking for the great new translation of the Iliad.
Oh, I think it's Alice Oswald, isn't it?
Looking at that poem is extraordinary right now, as we are, I say, the United States, as we are bombing Iran, as we are doing the things we're doing all over the world, as we are so committed to war, to look at these older poems that are talking about what war really does to people, what really happens. There is nothing heroic about this. It is devastation on every side.
Gabrielle Calvocoressi, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Let's potluck in Ireland.
Let's do it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for being with us today for Melody or Witchcraft. You can find out more about today's guest by going to GabrielleCalvocoressi.com. That's CalvoCoressi. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Our theme music is by Emma Wallace. For complete show notes and photos, listen through the links at melodyorwitchcraft.com. You can also find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and elsewhere. Regardless of where you listen, support us by commenting, liking, reposting, recommending. We would love to hear from you.
We would. Disagree with me. I'm into it.